What's up YouTube? This is the Wisco Boarder channel. My name is Chad. Welcome to part 2 of the transom rebuild. I've got my piece of marine plywood here and the piece of transom that I cut off to use as a template to start making the two-piece laminate transom that I'm going to make. This is 1/2 inch marine plywood BC. If you don't know the difference between regular plywood and marine plywood, really there is no difference in the wood itself. It's the glue that's used in the plywood that withstands moisture better than regular ACX or any other type of plywood. So if you're gonna do this, make sure you get marine grade plywood. I'm going to mark the transom cutout onto this board. I'm gonna do 2 pieces. This is 1/2 inch. Need to laminate it into a 1 inch piece. So I'll go ahead and get this marked out and cut out, and then I'll show you how the laminating process works. Super simple, just some epoxy or resin between the 2 layers, clamped up for a day or so, and then we'll cut it out to shape. Okay, got our pieces of plywood cut out. You will notice that I did not waste any wood other than what's gonna get trimmed off of the transom after we laminate it. I do want to make note that if you're buying plywood these days, you probably know how expensive plywood is, but this 4x8 sheet of 1/2 inch marine grade plywood was $100. So I am not wasting any of it. The rest of this sheet's gonna go in the storage unit and save it for a later date. But this is the size we need. It is oversized. So I will laminate it first, and then we will mark out the transom to do another rough cut, and I just used a really coarse blade for the jigsaw. I'll do another rough cut after we get it laminated, and then we'll use the transom piece with the router in order to get it cut to the size that we need to fit in the slot. That's it, just a tiny little piece, and mark it out, we'll get it laminated. Okay, I've got the resin mixed up. We'll just brush this on. Actually, we'll just kind of dump this on here and spread it all out. Then we'll take this side, just lay this down. There's no reason to coat both sides. It's going to be clamped super tight. And we will have coverage on both. The more clamps you have, the better. I don't know how many are on here. I would guess somewhere around 20. The board going across the middle is making sure to clamp the middle section. Zero worries about what it looks like on the inside. It's clamped very, very tightly, and these boards will essentially become one. You can see it's not, as I told you before, it's a rough cut, so the boards don't match up, but we will use the router after this this laminate becomes one, and cut this out to the shape of the transom. All right, about a week has gone by, and I've got the transom board unclamped, and it's nice and solid. I've got the cutout piece laying on top of it, so I'm going to use that as a guide for the initial cuts. So I'm just going to trace around the cutout piece there, rough cut it outside the line about 1/8 to a 1/4 of an inch, and then I will use this piece with my router to cut the shape of the new transom board to the exact shape of this cutout piece. There are some kind of rough edges around the cutout piece that I'm going to have to smooth out with a sander after I get it cut, but using the router will ensure me that I have an exact sized piece to go back in the boat. So I'll get this board marked, get the jigsaw out, do the rough cut, and then we'll get the router set up and trim it down to size. Got the transom piece cut out with the router. You can, as I mentioned before, there are just a rough cutout piece of fiberglass. So down here we've got some waviness. I'll smooth that out a little bit with a sander. Got a little bit of a paper thin ridge here that my router just barely missed. But this piece of wood is now the exact shape of the piece of fiberglass that was clamped to the bottom of it. So I'll get this piece of wood cleaned up and then we'll do a test fit. Okay, we'll do the first test fit here. And I'm sure this is going to be somewhat oversized and need to be trimmed, but really close. All right, I've got a good gap here and a good gap on this side as well as on top. So I think what I will do is get the jigsaw back out and just do about 1/8 of an inch trim along the bottom here, because that will allow the bottom to go in. And I've got probably about 1/8 of an inch up here that I can use to cinch that up a little bit. So I'll trim about 1/8 off the bottom, and then we'll come back and do another fitting. But not bad for our first shot at it. The shape is perfect. So we just gotta be careful with the jigsaw trimming the bottom there, but we'll do that and then we'll fit it again. All right, fit number 2. Rather than use the jigsaw, I used that fiberglass piece to clamp it here, clamp it onto the board again, and then I beveled. I made a little bit of a bevel, about a 7-degree bevel on all edges. The replacement transom piece fits. I've got pretty good gap all around for the filler that I'm going to use. You can see there's a decent gap right here. Same thing up here. And I'm going to use some chopped strand fiber resin to squeeze into these gaps. But what I need to do now, you can see it's not, this side's pretty good. I've got just about enough space to get the piece of fiberglass back in here. This side doesn't want to go in all the way, see it's still sticking out here. So I think the issue is here, is I haven't cleaned out the leftover fiberglass from the splash roll tub. So this stuff will push in a little bit, but I need to get all this whole section here cleaned out in order for the new board to go in all the way. Pretty good fit on the second try. And yeah, got a little cleanup to do before we can actually stick this in place. So I'll do that, and then we'll do fit number 3. After grinding the backside of the splash well, I decided to just go ahead and completely cut out that whole bottom piece that was there before. It just was kind of in the way, and I wasn't able to get the transom piece fit perfectly because it wasn't a flat surface. When this boat was originally built, you know, the transom would have been in place, and then they fiberglassed on the inside, and just is not level. So with that out of the way, now the transom fits very nicely. I'll have to use a little bit of clamping pressure over here to get that corner to come in just a little bit, but that should not be a big deal. So I'm going to push the boat back in the garage. We'll get this wiped down with acetone and mix up a batch of chopped strand fiber epoxy and get the transom clamped in place. All right, so I've got my epoxy mixed up with the chopped strand fibers. I'm going to paint it on this section here, and then put a little bit on the transom, and then get it clamped in place. This is step 1, which fairly straightforward. Probably still gonna make a mess, but that's gonna happen when you work with epoxy. Chopped strand fibers help the epoxy stick in a little bit of a thicker layer. About the same width as the splash well. Okay, you got a pretty uniform gap all the way around. So now we clamp it. All right, well, that's step 1. So once that cures, the transom is going to be in place. It's not coming back out. And then I will use a squeeze bag. We'll fill this gap all the way around. This looks good. Let this cure. I did not video this part. This is getting the piece of fiberglass put back on the transom. It's the exact same thing that I just did to put the transom board in place. I just smeared chop strand fiber, reinforced resin all over both sides of, so the transom side, the transom board, and the inside of the fiberglass both got painted, and just put it up in place, and it got it nice and tightly clamped. So we'll let this sit for a few days because I'm headed up to Thirsty Whale for the weekend. So we'll come back to this next week after it's all cured. All right, well, I'm back from a weekend up on Thirsty Whale. I'm gonna start taking the clamps off the Tacoma, and we'll have a look at what the transom looks like and some of the details of what I'm gonna have to do next in just a minute. Clamps are off, and we now have a completely solid transom. Now, you may have already seen there is an issue that I'll have to work around with some filler. The boat, the original transom as it was put in, probably wasn't put in all that straight. So the replacement transom is also not all that straight. And my guess is that they probably used some fiberglass on the inside of the transom, on the inside of the hull here on this side, because as you can see, it didn't fit back in the original hole as a plug. And then on this side, we have the hull pushed a little bit too far in. So this is not a big deal. In order to seal all the way around this, I do have to grind away, put a bevel on either side here, and then we'll build it back up with some fiberglass and some fairing and filler material. So not concerned about that. Also not concerned about this because the transom, the fiberglass on this side is like 3/8 of an inch thicker than it is on that side. So this is just going to get ground away, and I will be getting into the fiberglass fibers, but we'll cover that back up with some more fiberglass filler, and then completely sand the whole transom and re-gel coat it. So the primary thing here is it is solid. All right, well, once again, what I was hoping to do in maybe 1 or 2 videos is gonna end up being 3 or 4, but I wanted to show the inside of the transom. I've got the gap filled. I did that the other day, and then just now I put on the fillet, which is basically the transition between the floor and the transom. So after this cures, I will then put a layer or 2 of fiberglass over the entire inside of the transom to completely seal it off. I need to get up inside there to put some filler up inside there. I may just glass over that rather than putting some filler in. It's been so hot today that I literally couldn't film this just because it's like 90 degrees outside, and as you can see, my face is all red. The epoxy, when you mix in the chop strand fibers and a thickener like flocked cotton, that speeds up the exothermic reaction of the epoxy, and it kicks off very quickly. In fact, I lost 2 batches, not 2 full batches, but you can see here how much I lost. It hardened up so much faster than I could use it. So that is the end of, I guess, part 2. I think this is what this will be. And then part 3, I'll do the inside fiberglass, and we'll do the grinding out here and the gel coat, I hope. So Thanks for watching this episode of the Wisco Boater channel. Hope you enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button, send me some comments. And if you want to be notified when I post new videos like this one, hit that notification bell. We'll see you next time. Happy boating, everybody.